David Thomas, welcome to Let's Parent on Purpose. It's really nice to meet you. I've got to meet your colleague, Sissy Goff, a couple of times, and she's fantastic. So I just automatically assume you are fantastic as well. So we're really glad to have you here today.
Well, she told me great things about you. She talked about how much I'm going to enjoy this conversation, and she's a hard act to follow. So we are going to need to lower the bar already, okay?
Well, I feel a lot of pressure too. So. You are at Daystar Counseling is it Nashville or just south of Nashville? I think like the Franklin area. Is that right?
We are actually in the city of Nashville.
Okay.
There are a lot of nonprofits that are all around Middle Tennessee, but we have a Nashville zip code and have been in this community we're about to celebrate in a few weeks our 40th birthday.
Wow.
So we've been doing this work for a long time.
And can you tell me a little bit, what is Daystar? What's kind of your drive and purpose in what you guys do?
I love to. We focus just on the pediatric population. So our entire focus is kids, adolescents, and families. And we do that through individual counseling, group counseling. We do some summer experiences for kids who are part of our programming as well. And we do the work a little different in that we're in a house rather than an office, which was a very intentional decision, because if any folks listening have ever taken kids or adolescents you love to counseling, you know that first appointment in particular can be a somewhat overwhelming experience.
Absolutely,
so we're doing as much as we can to help kids feel at ease when they come through the front door of our place. We have 6 therapy dogs on staff who are hands down the most sought after therapists. We always, we all laugh about it is such a great, humbling experience to go to work every day and be outperformed by a dog. Like, it just helps you know your place in the world.
That's funny.
It's an amazing place. I am in my 28th year of being there, and I work with an incredible team of human beings and canines, and have never wanted to be anywhere but there. I'm just thankful for the work.
So 29 years, and I'm curious. It's all been you've been in the pediatrics. So this is children through teenagers. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. We see a couple of my colleagues see some college age students as well, but our primary focus is kind of 6 to 18 years old.
Okay. So I would say human nature hasn't changed since, God created humans and since the fall. But circumstances and situations have certainly changed. And I have noticed just kind of a real change in what the particular challenges are of the young people I've served with. I'm curious, in 29 years of counseling, what do you see that's kind of the driving forces now that maybe weren't the major pressure points in young people's lives when you started?
Well, I would first say I wholeheartedly agree with you. The same things are still true about child development that were when I trained back in the 70s and 80s. And, so many of the same things that kids face are still true in some ways, but there are also some new things that they face. And, we could have an entire conversation about just what technology alone has done to impact the pediatric population. But I would argue, in almost 30 years of doing this work, we've seen some big swings in the philosophy of parenting, maybe is the best way to say it, that I think have brought about strong differences in kids. And I don't know if you'd agree or disagree with this, but I think a temptation for every one of us in life when we course correct is to overcorrect. And I would argue that we're seeing some evidence of that now. I think, a lot of adults in this world grew up in families, not all, but many, where, the overarching mantra might have been kind of suck it up, buttercup, type thing. And then maybe our overcorrection is that we've done an amazing job of moving more toward helping kids articulate their experience and name their feelings. I am 100% on board with that. I have books about that very thing, but one overcorrection maybe we've seen as a practice is that we're doing so much just listening. Like, we talk a lot about the importance of naming and navigating emotions, and equal parts of both. And I would argue we're an A+ on naming, and we're still kind of a C- on navigating. Like, we're not necessarily helping kids figure out, what do I do with all this emotion? It's great I can name what I'm feeling, but what do I do with the feelings? And that being a place where I think we've overcorrected into so much listening without a lot of practical helping kids regulate their emotions, which is, you and I know as adults in this world, foundational to our everyday experience. Like every day in this world, I'm going to feel stress. I'm going to
Hmm.
feel fear. I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to feel anger. I'm going to feel sadness. Like we've been guaranteed that. If you reread Romans 5, Romans 8, John 10, like in this world, we're going to have trouble. We're
Hmm.
going to groan with all of creation. What does it look like for me to name and navigate my experience? And that's something Sissy and I hope through our writing, through the podcast, through teaching, that we can really press into in helping parents see maybe we have overcorrected in this way, made a good swing, I think, in some ways. But
Hmm.
what I would argue has happened in that process is I think kids have, if I were to put a big summary statement to it, I think we have in many ways diminished resilience and durability and
Mm.
capability in kids. And I think we have increased some fragility that I would
Yeah.
argue, a lot of adults in this world have a lot of durability and
Hmm.
capability. They're highly resourceful, but maybe they don't know how to name their experience. So,
Absolutely. As you were talking, I was thinking recently it's kind of surfaced again as a joke, but it's a real poignant picture of the difference of my generation growing up. I was the latchkey kid generation, had great parents, but mom got off work at 5:30, and at sixth grade I was babysitting,
yes,
my third grade cousin. So come on, girl, we're going to go play tackle football with the kids down the street until, somebody feeds us dinner. But
yes,
there was a TV commercial that would appear, like you can find it on YouTube, and it would come out. It's like, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Like, this was a common commercial in the 1980s, because
yes,
the reality was many parents had no idea where their kids were at 10 p.m. And you take that to now, we've got Life 360. I can GPS track my children with geotags that identify every time they go a place that I don't want them to go or where they should go. And so when you talked about naming and navigating, one of the big things that I've seen is, um, and I think this goes right onto the resiliency and fragility, which I know we want to talk about. Uh, Parents are now not only hyper aware of where their kids are and what their kids are doing, the kids are hyper scheduled, and
yes,
the children are they don't have the ability to navigate because they are being navigated. Like mom
yes,
and dad are holding their hand and marching them through and to everything, and defending them, against the teacher and the administration as the first line of defense, instead of, have you considered talking to them? Can you figure it out? So I have absolutely seen it, and we live in it, and I'm curious, what is the course correction back towards health? Not back towards the commercials of, do you know where your kids are? What would
right.
you say are some of the course corrections back towards like a healthy middle ground in these things?
I love your question. And I love even you beckoning back to that commercial, because if we were to
Hmm.
put, a word or phrase to that, there was for that generation maybe not enough awareness, for this generation maybe too much awareness, and the
Yeah.
healthy middle would be awareness. Like,
Right.
how can I be aware? How can I pay attention? And how can, as I am paying attention, be asking myself questions? Like Sissy and I often will ask parents when we teach, like, what are two things that you are currently doing for your child that they could be doing for themselves?
That's
Like,
a
think about
great
that right
question.
now, whether you have a 3-year old or a 13-year old or a 23-year old, where are some places that maybe I'm doing too much, fill in the blank, supporting, protecting, coddling, going to battle for. There's a lot of ways that I think we could finish those sentences. And if
Hmm.
we just kind of sat in those questions, those realities, I think it could move us to that healthy middle ground of
Hmm.
awareness of ourselves, awareness of them, awareness of where we're doing too much, awareness of where they may not be doing enough. And I was talking with a young parent the other day who said, I wish growing up that my mom had said less, let me get this for you, and which I think is important to think about, and more of, you can get this yourself. What does it
Hmm.
look like to live in that interim space?
Yeah. I can tell you that my children don't currently appreciate when I tell them that. Um, I'm, I've kind of learned to be much more default of like, Seems like that's something do you have thumbs and hands? Like, I bet you could do this yourself. So, it may be my tone. It may be, but, yeah, that's one of those, like, we appreciate down the road, not in the moment. One observation that I do have is, and I think this is a fair reality, our children now have more information and are required, I think, children and adults, more information and required to make more decisions than I feel like
Yes.
any humans in history. And so, as a parent, I will tell you sometimes I'm doing things for my kids that I shouldn't be doing because I get so much information and I have to make so many decisions. I don't have the space to contemplate, should I be doing this or not? Because, like, it just
Right.
has to get done, and I'm the fastest person around to do it.
Yes.
But in the process, um, I am robbing them of the competency of knowing that they have what it
Yes.
takes. So, David, what can we do to, like, that's the reality we live in. Information, decisions, all time high. Um, so what can we do to still, and I loved your question. I think that's a fantastic one. Are there any other things you would say, what can I do to help increase my child's competency, which will ultimately give them greater resiliency for the things that they need to do in life?
Yes. I would say if we were to ask a follow-up question to ourselves beyond the what's two things I'm doing, a next question I'd love for parents to ask would be what's getting in the way? So I had a mom tell me the other day, I loved your example because it reminded me, I had a mom tell me the other day, she said, David, I was thinking about you asking me that question and I realized I'm filling up their water bottles. They could 100% be doing that. But the reason I'm doing it is because they'll make a mess when they do it. Most kids will. Like the ice will
Mm-hmm.
go all over the
Right.
floor. Water's going to slosh down the front of the refrigerator. I'm going to have to wipe that down. So my need for cleanliness might be getting in the way. My
Mm.
fear might be getting in the way. My story might be getting in the way. When you gave that great example earlier of, we're going to battle with teachers and coaches, maybe my story involves, I didn't feel like my parents were paying enough attention and I got bullied in school. Therefore, I'm going to be camped out in the principal's office every time I hear the word conflict, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to how could I role play with my kid what it would look like to navigate conflict? And maybe it's not bullying that's happening. I want
Mm-hmm.
certainly every parent listening to pay attention if it is legitimately bullying, but sometimes it's just the back and forth that kids have in conflict when they're developing socially, and we do too much interfering there that roadblocks their social development. So
Mm-hmm.
I think to your question, I'd want parents to ask a follow-up question of what gets in the way. And could it be my fear, my story, my need for control, which I
Mm.
think are three leading factors often that cause us to intervene or interfere too much too often.
Really good. And that my story, my need for control, I realized something. My kids are all experiencing some form of some, like, I have three children still in schools, middle school and high school. Each of them has an issue with the teacher. And in some of those cases, I would agree the issue is not fair. Like, it's really not. And I also know that I'm comparatively, I'm an exceptional communicator compared to my kids. Also, I've probably got some pull and power. I've been in the community a long time. I could probably make some way in there, if and change some things. And at the same time, if I do that without giving them truly every opportunity, even if their grades suffer short term,
Yes.
if I do that, then all I've reinforced is that daddy has to solve all my problems.
Mm.
And that's not helpful, because I remember having teachers that I just were grossly unfair.
Yes.
And my mom and dad never stepped in. And sometimes my grades suffered for it. I turned out okay, even though, I might have got a B in something that I deserved an A. But I also learned to deal with mean
Yes.
people in authority. I learned to get by in situations that weren't unfair and not make that the end of the world. And
Yes.
so I need to not rob my children of that situation,
No.
even if I absolutely have some of these issues. Like, I could probably solve them in 15 minutes in there, and it may take them 6 weeks. But, uh, true growth and development never happens in 15 minutes. And so it's a conviction that I have to keep going back to, is like, what am I doing by interfering sometimes?
Well, and to your wisdom, I think the other reminder that feels so needed and necessary is knowing that these are the practice contexts for all the different moments our kids going to encounter in
Mm.
their adult lives. Like, to your great example, it's like, I know with all certainty at some point you had a difficult colleague or a difficult boss or a difficult supervisor in some job, some context at some point later, that difficult teacher was practice context in some way. I, will say to parents, every one of us as parents gets worn out with sibling rivalry and sibling conflict. But at the end of the day, it is important that we acknowledge within figuring out how to navigate that if they don't learn to work through conflict, which means they have to have conflict, how in the world will they be married someday? Like, there
Yeah.
is not a conflict-free marriage in existence.
Right.
There's not a conflict-free friendship. There's not a conflict-free parent-child relationship. So the conflict serves as a context for preparation,
Mm.
and that's another way to spin it that allows us, I think, to ask that second question of what gets in the way. Maybe it's my desire for there to never be conflict and always have peace, and at the end of the day, I'm not helping my kids if that's the end goal or the
Mm.
target I'm attempting to move toward.
Mm. David, if you had a young person come into your practice for counseling and you realize, no, whatever, they may come in, anxiety is the buzzword and the reality of this generation. Um, if in that anxiety you begin to observe, their anxiety is really disproportionate to the things that are actually happening in their life, and the truth is they're just too fragile. And fragility and resiliency, it's the opposite. A
Yes.
tree, we live in South Florida, there are certain trees that can withstand hurricanes, and then there are trees that people plant because they think they're beautiful down here, and they snap just as soon as the winds get hard. So that's the real difference between resiliency and fragility. So you see this in a young person that's come into you. Their anxiety's through the roof, and you realize it's because, truthfully, they're just too fragile. They're not resilient enough. What are some practices that you would begin to encourage in that child's life, or for mom and dad to try to implement in that child's life to begin to build this in them?
We talk a lot about exposures and ladders. And if I were to give the layman's definition to that, it's kind of baby stepping my way towards something that's hard or scary.
Hmm.
And how in all moments when fear, anxiety, worry, overwhelm creep up, how am I baby stepping my way in the direction of what's hard versus avoiding discomfort, which is the easiest trap to step into anytime anxiety's in the mix. In
Hmm.
fact, the definition that our dear friend Sissy Goff gives to anxiety, which I love and we use as a practice, is that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of myself. The
Hmm.
problem or the situation's too big, I'm too small. And every time I avoid the problem, I'm actually confirming that definition. You know what? It is too big and I'm too incapable, as opposed to if I'm baby stepping my way toward the hard thing, I'm pushing against that definition. So my
Hmm.
challenge to parents would be, where and how are you doing that now? Where and how could you be doing more of that? And what does it look like to stand in support of that, even in the hardest moments? So let's say the classic presentation of kids who get 2 practices into a brand new sport or activity they've been excited about, and it's 10 times harder than they thought it would be, and they want to quit. Where could I stay the course in helping them finish a season,
Mm-hmm.
which is a good and important thing to do? Realizing that might involve a lot of tears on the way to practice, a lot of resistance to getting in the car, a lot of refusal on game days, whatever it may be. We talk about how escape and avoidance are the easiest traps to step into when anxiety's in the mix, and support and challenge are what we want to be moving toward in all
Hmm.
moments. And I think exposures and ladders are just part of that support and challenge so that we're moving in the direction we want to. And that's needed.
Really love that. I'm going to come back with a follow-up question if I remember it. But as you were talking, I was thinking a recent podcast I did with my friend Virgil Tanner. We were talking about discipleship in the home, and one of the practices they have around their dinner table is a regular question: "What did you fail at this week?"
I
And
love that.
when that people share, they all clap. And so they're
Mm,
normalizing that in order for me to learn, I have to try things that are beyond me. And
mm,
now I don't have to be afraid of failure because, failure is a part of growth. And so one of those things, like as a mom and dad, I have to be willing to sit in my kid's failure and not think of them as a failure. And then the big part is the ego, not think of myself as a failure,
Yes.
because there's so much of the ego that's wrapped up in there. So then my follow-up question, could the exposures and ladders, I love the idea. Can you give me like one practical example of what that would look like?
I'd love to. And let me just first say, I love that practice. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah,
if every family were to adopt that, and as you said, what an invitation to a growth mindset, which every one of us needs, and we've overwhelming research to confirm that. But if I were to think about one current example, even of exposures and ladders, I would argue that, as you and I were talking about changes in the work over these decades, I am both fascinated by and deeply concerned about. I've done a lot of work with boys and adolescent males over the years. How many boys of different ages I'm seeing avoiding what I call healthy risk, whether that is an elementary age boy resisting or refusing to try out for a new sport or a new activity, a teenage boy who's resisting or refusing getting a part-time job, or asking a girl to a homecoming dance, or taking the ACT and applying to college, or getting their driver's license. When I was growing up, I didn't know a single living, breathing adolescent who didn't want their driver's license, wasn't chomping at the bit.
On the day of their birthday.
Yes.
Yeah,
I've never encountered as many teenagers who are refusing to learn to drive. And I think the common denominator in all those, from little to big, is a fear of risk and how necessary risk is to growth. So, to your great question, I had a conversation with an adolescent boy not long ago who is terrified. He is a freshman in high school, and his parents have wisely, wonderfully said to him, I'm a huge advocate of this, you have to go to at least 2 homecomings and 1 prom during your high school career.
Huh.
Yeah. And they're like, we don't care whether you date a girl or not, but we want you to have the exposure, the experience of asking a girl out, of opening the car door, of sitting across the table from her at dinner and carrying the conversation, all of which we know as adult men are necessary ingredients for dating, for courting, for marriage. And so he and I started with just a basic exposure, because he would say, I feel overwhelmed just talking to girls. I'm like, okay, what if you and I come up with 3 open-ended questions that you could type into your phone, and right before study hall, he's sitting next to a girl who's trying to talk to him and he doesn't talk back a lot to her. You go to the bathroom right before study hall, look at these 3 questions and just pick one. Like, that's as small as we're going to start right there. Like, I want him to just practice 10 to 15 minutes of just conversation with a girl in one of his classes in high school, so that we can work our way toward him asking someone to the homecoming dance next year in the fall. So that would be one example, and where I know with all certainty, if he didn't have the challenge and the accountability of this, he would somehow just never get around to it. And then that definition we talked about would become confirmed. Talking to girls, asking a girl out is way too big and scary. I'm way too incapable.
Yeah,
so there's one example.
That's funny. I was thinking, like, you can make the goal, ask 5 girls out that you know are going to say no. So that, you get, there's a great part. Like, I remember asking girls out and them saying no and being like, okay, I was just kidding, which wasn't the best way to handle it. But, you still took a risk, and you had to see the girl the next day because you sat next to her in math class.
Yes.
And it also reminds me, again, of something I mentioned on a recent podcast. I heard this interview about people who had tried to learn Spanish in high school or in college classes and could not do it. And then they become multilingual experts. And the way that they actually ended up doing it was immersion. And then their goal would be, I'm going to make 100 mistakes today in this new language. And so my learning is not complete until I've screwed up at least 100 times, because like you're going to be completely willing to try new things if success is considered, I tried a new thing and failed at it, but it just hyper extended their ability to learn quickly because you get the fear of failure out of the way. So I love that idea. Early on, let's talk early on. And you have a book that I want to spend a little bit of time on. You guys have actually released, Daystar, you're releasing a series of books. So real quickly, just tell me what the series of books is about, and then we'll talk about yours specifically.
I love to. The series is called the Daystar Dog Series, and they're
Hmm.
based on the therapy dogs who work in our practice currently or who have in the past. And each dog teaches something new to kids.
Hmm.
And each book has a particular tool or strategy at the end of the book. It also has some questions kids can ask back and forth to each other. And our great hope is that we would just be laying a foundation for emotional development on the front side of kids' growth and development. Sissy and I wrote some companion books a couple of years ago. She wrote a book called Raising Worry-Free Girls. I wrote a book called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. She wrote a workbook for 6 to 12-year-old girls called Braver, Stronger, Smarter. I
Hmm.
wrote a workbook for boys called Strong and Smart. And we love the idea of equipping parents and also arming elementary, middle school age kids with these tools, but then started thinking, how could we go even lower in ages?
Hmm.
Like, how could we offer something to kids in the 3 to 6 space, for example? And that's where the Daystar Dog series came about. And my particular book is about a yellow lab named Owen, who I owned for 12, almost 13 years, was just a sweetheart of a dog who trained to be not just a therapy dog I used in my practice, but he and I volunteered for 3 years at our local children's hospital, Vanderbilt Children's Hospital
Oh,
here in
cool.
Nashville. And Owen is actually teaching kids about resilience. And it's so in keeping with everything you and I are saying. And he and I went through this pretty long and extensive process required to become a therapy dog. And then we did a second layer of training just to volunteer at the children's hospital. They kind of had their own training. And so by the time we actually did our first visit, this guy had a PhD. I mean, he had done a
Oh,
lot of work. And
wow.
we walked into that first visit, and what I could not have replicated in practice, but what happened was, here are all these kids in rooms that he was just itching to get into, but overwhelmed by what was happening in the hallways, which was it was full of people in white coats. They
Mm.
were pushing machines. There were a lot of sounds and sirens going off in different moments, and it overwhelmed him. I mean, to the point that he was paralyzed. He was literally, when we walked to the door of the first room of a little boy who was so excited to see him, he walked backwards, not forward. And I remember thinking
Wow.
in my head, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I've trained this long, this hard with this dog, and I can't even get him in the room. And so I tell the story, which is true, of the first time I had to pick up this 70-pound dog. So I have these limbs and tail flopping all over the place and carry him in the room and put him on the bed. With this kid, he was just aching to be in his company, but overwhelmed by what he had to walk through to get into that space. And so I talk about in the book that, Owen would have missed the magic of being in the company of this brave, resilient kid who was fighting for his life, fighting
Mm.
cancer. And that kid would have missed the connection of being with this dog who ended up offering some good comfort to him. And how that's true for every one of us. When fear gets in the way, it's going to, if I live into that definition you and I talked about a few minutes ago, I'm going to start to believe less and less of what is true about me, how God has defined me, to believe that to be true. And I'm going to miss his people. I'm going to miss his creation. I'm going to miss opportunities for growth, as you and I are discussing in this moment. And so it's a story about the resilience this dog developed and what he gained through the process of pushing through fear.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's funny because you don't think of dogs needing to grow in resiliency, but absolutely do. And really interesting that in this story, your dog is going into a place with the most resilient kids on earth. I have
Yes.
a son who walked through leukemia and then relapse and then bone marrow transplant. So very familiar with, yeah, there's a steadiness to my son that you don't find in grown men
I
very often.
believe you.
Um,
Wholeheartedly believe you.
yeah, and it's just so cute to think about the dog who's there to give therapy needs the same courage that the kids do. So yeah,
Exactly.
I've looked at your book. It's a great little book.
Thank you.
Owen, a lesson in resilience. Owen learns he has what it takes, and I think that's it's interesting. If I were to even talk to and say as a youth pastor, what do I see are just some of the core needs of young people in this particular generation. One of them is to be seen,
Yes.
to be specifically seen, but then also to know that they have what it takes,
Yes.
and so that we We give them opportunities. We give them encouragement. We let them fail. We don't let their failure be the biggest, the end of the world. But yeah, that resiliency is such a vital, vital thing. And to think that the most important thing, and I have taught lessons on resiliency in our student ministry, but I'm very aware that there's nothing that I can lecture that will overpower the regular habitual habits that are
Agree.
happening in the household. And so if we're going to teach our kids resiliency, we don't need to sit down and give them a lecture on resiliency. We need to give them opportunities to fail with a
Yes.
safety net before they are launched out on their own. And so that
Yes.
whole I+1, I can, this is what I can do. This is just beyond what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try to do it. And sometimes I'm going to do it right. And sometimes I'm going to fail at it. I
Yes.
think that's the secret. So, but a great, great little story to show that he had everything it took.
Yep.
Your little dog did. He just, had to believe. So that's really
Absolutely.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah. David, where can people pick up these books? They were launched at the beginning of, or middle of May. They're the first
Yes.
of several, right? That are
Yes.
going to be coming out. So where should people get a hold of them?
So we have 2 coming out in May. We have 2 coming out in November. And if you were to go to our website, raisingboysandgirls.com, that'd be the easiest place. It'll take you straight to it. And the book that my dear friend and colleague Sissy Goff wrote is called Lucy, and you can buy the 2 of them together. You can buy them separate, but that's where we house everything, our podcast, our content, our books, these books. And so I'd say jump over there.
Yeah, and a fantastic podcast. You guys check out.
Thank you.
Is the podcast Raising Boys and Girls as well?
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Well, sir, I thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, your wisdom. And if somebody wants to follow or get a hold of you, is that same website the place to do it?
Yes, it'll take you straight to, we are active on Instagram and Facebook primarily, but we've got a YouTube channel as well. So head over to raisingboysandgirls.com. It'll take you straight to all those places as well. And Jay, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's been really, really
good.
good.
I am for the work you're doing, and honored to get to be a part of time with you today.
Appreciate it and hope you come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.